Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honoured that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to InnovaBuzz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
Choice never stops. And as much as that can feel whelmful to people, that constant availability of making choice is actually the most freeing thing that you can have in this life. Because what that means is that the choice you made is not the choice you have to keep making.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't listened yet to my recent conversations with Arjun Sen of Zen Mango and with serial entrepreneur, author and speaker Pete Martin, then check them out after you've listened to today's conversation, of course. I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest Paul Sockett, a professional actor, storyteller and voice artist. Paul is a coach, holding space for others to explore the story their physical stuff is telling and how they can claim their space in alignment with their truth. He helps people write bios and copy that they can connect with and are excited to share instead of ticking the boxes, the terminology boxes, and simply getting it out of the way. Paul is a nomad, a writer, and a creator exploring places and ways to invite curiosity and listening to our intuition. In our discussion today, Paul talked to me about how the stuff we collect and store defines the stories we tell about ourselves. We talked about gathering information versus answers and proof of opinion. And we observed that choice is always available. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Paul Sockett. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the InnovaBuzz podcast all the way from Portimao. I think that might be the wrong pronunciation, but we'll clarify that in a moment. Faro in Portugal. Paul Sockett. He's a coach and workshop leader, a storyteller and creator. He's also a professional actor and a voiceover artist, or a voice artist. So that's going to be really interesting on our podcast. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Paul. It's a real privilege to have you here as my guest.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
What's the pronunciation of where you are in Portugal?
Well, as a nomad / wandering person, I'm actually not in Portimao anymore. I'm now north of Portugal, still in Portugal, but north of Portugal, in a place called Alcobaça, which is close to Nazaré, which is where the world's largest waves have been recorded, I'm told. Big surf competitions, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll be exciting to watch. I suspect I wouldn't want to go in the water there. Now, Jeff Harry, who was our guest on episode 428 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have a conversation with you, Paul, and he introduced us. So big hello to Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Now, one of the things you talk about, and we had a chat the other day, that you're all about deepening connection to others and to the self, as well as aligning with value-based choices. And I know one of the things you say on your website is that we all have a story, but sometimes they're hard to tell, or we find it hard to tell, and even harder to accept sometimes. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that in some more detail. Before we do that, though, what impact are you making in the world? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a great question. Because impact is all part of this reframing that I'm trying to do for myself and to invite others to do, which is to relinquish the need for impact. But the impact that I'm having is inviting people to not put as much pressure on the scale of the impact that they have. Because every person has impact, whatever they do, say, however they show up in the world. There is some ripple that happens as a result of that. But we're told that impact is this global shift, change the world, get into space first, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like innovation in some ways, because it's kind of, if you make a slight improvement to something you do every day, to me, that's innovation. And, if you're resourceful in solving a problem, that's innovation. And yet some people see innovation as, totally disrupting an industry, like the internet is innovation, or going into space is innovation. And so it's the same thing, isn't it? So people say, I want to be innovative. They sort of look for this big thing. Right. Yeah. I think because on that scaled sort of perception of impact, is that it means that our choices are actually more limited, because the things we've got to choose to do have got to be more significant in order to have a bigger impact. But actually, just as you were saying, new doesn't necessarily have to mean sort of life changing. New is just different. And so if we scale it down to our own personal needs, then we have a much wider array of choices. And so the change, the innovation can be, like you say, just a small thing of, not having coffee in the morning and trying tea, and gathering the information that comes from that. Because the more habits we get into and the longer those habits go on for, the less we consciously choose that thing each time we do it. That's right. And it's kind of, I'm a big fan of James Clear and the atomic habit. So he uses that in a positive sense to say, well, do the little things and just repeat those. And over time that will compound and it will become unconscious. And so therefore you will have changed the behavior for the better. But of course that, if you take that flip side, that can also, the danger is you can also fall into bad behavior by just taking on those little things and letting them go. Yeah. I mean, well, it's really interesting because I try not to use good and bad as descriptors, because actually it just gets to be, well, it just gets to be an unconscious. That's the point of having a habit. We cannot exist in the world where everything we experience is new every time, because whelm would be too much. We'd be too stimulated and we wouldn't be able to function in the world. So I get it. Habits are a thing that we do to allow us to compartmentalize certain parts of our life, to allow us to live. And there is the perspective of habit, which means that the less conscious we have to be for that thing to happen. So we aren't necessarily choosing it. We are adopting convenience. We're adopting safety. We're adopting something that we know works. Certainty. Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's a fear around uncertainty. But the thing is, the difference between certainty and uncertainty, they aren't polar opposites. Yeah. You can also be, go on. And also we want variety in many ways too, which is uncertainty. Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's the paradox is this, and this is why I work with people, around their physical stuff, which is tied to their internal stuff. Because we are caught in this forced dichotomy of shame and scarcity, of you don't have enough or you must have more. Why don't you have enough? And you don't have enough. And it's terrifying, because it really requires everybody to be in that space in the middle in order to shape people, in order to affect the bottom line. Yeah. And so that's where I come in and I have an impact, because what I offer people is a chance to notice the story that they're trying to tell
through the stuff that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is often a difference between what's true for them in this moment and the identity that they're trying to provide evidence for through their physical stuff. And through stuff like words. Words are really important. They are parts of the stuff that we have, because every word we choose has been conditioned and has been shaped through our lived experience, through the familial conditioning, the places we've worked, the people we've been friends with, all of those factors, all the media that we've consumed. So the words we choose provide evidence of an identity that we want the world to see of us. And I get it, because that's societal conditioning in a nutshell. It's trying to make us choose an identity that other people will see us as, whether that's true or not, which is safety, which is certainty, which is all of those things, right? And so we find habit within those systems, which are not bad or good. They are just, it's information. So what I do is I go, there are no answers. There's only information. So what information can you gather from this experience? And it really, it's mind blowing to see people's response if they go, wait, what? I don't need the answer. All I need to do is gather information and make a choice in the present. What? And it's amazing, because you see this flower kind of start to open. And a flower has to open in order to live further, to propagate, and to allow insects to come and, pollinate and all of these beautiful things. But there is a safety that comes with, I'm a flower. You can tell I'm a tulip without opening. Yeah. Right. But it means that there is no vulnerability there, because, well, I'm showing you what I am, when actually that might not be true. Like, you might open up and you might be a Venus flytrap, which is not a good or a bad thing. It's just, we get to change.
It is, yeah. Yeah, fascinating metaphor. I'd like to come back to the story idea, and this idea of connecting story to things, what we have, what we collect. No, I'm probably a hoarder of the best quality. I imagine that as a digital nomad, you probably have minimized the amount of stuff you collect over the years, and you can fit it all into a backpack to make it easy to go from one place to another. Tell us a little bit more about this idea of, we collect stuff to kind of prove a story right, or to build this story or persona that we show to the world outside.
So a personal example that I always use is books. Now, I'm not a huge reader, but when I became a professional actor 16 years ago, my identity that had been shaped when I was a kid was that I needed to be helpful in order to be valid. Being useful validated me in the relationships that I had, in the family that I was in the school that I was in, all of those different facets. And so as I grow up, that sort of, it stays the same. The root is the same, but the way it manifests can be different. And so when I chose to be an actor, my sort of descriptors that I was trying to fulfill were to be professional, to be prepared, and to be ready. Just to be there, right? So I wasn't like uncertain, right? But if someone was going to put a play on, I had a copy of that play. If a friend of mine needed help, they had an audition for a play and I had a copy of it, I'm providing evidence that I'm helpful and useful, which validates the relationship. So this amounted to over 600 books. I'm not a big reader, Jürgen. I hadn't read many of those books, but there came a point where I have at least 6 big storage boxes, and I have great spatial arrangement skills. So those books were packed well. Right? And I've just got this tower of boxes, so I can't even really see the books, but I know I have them. And if someone needs one, then I'm ready.
Hmm.
And there must have come a point where I acquired a 600 and something book, and it wouldn't fit in one of these boxes, right? I needed a shoebox or something to put this one book in, and something just changed. And I went, this doesn't feel good. The discomfort of keeping that story going and providing evidence for that story that I was trying to tell was outweighed by the discomfort of keeping telling that story.
Hmm.
So my intuitive self started to go, this doesn't feel good. Whereas before, shame and scarcity had been loud and been going, this is just what you got to do. I mean, we get to the point where, have you got enough books? Will people think you are professional, prepared, ready enough if you've only got 599 books? And then there's the other part, the shaming part, which goes, you have acquired 599 books. Like, you shouldn't have that many books. But I mean, if you got rid of them now, you've wasted time, energy, space, logistical skills. You've wasted all of these forms of energy on these things. So you might as well keep them. So now I'm stuck with this thing. But then this one book just went, my intuitive self went, that's enough now. Like, that's not true. and I heard it for the first time. And it didn't mean that I just went, oh yeah, brilliant, I'm now an enlightened being. I went, oh no, something is wrong because I've been tying to this story all this time. So I procrastinated. I did all the things. I tried to justify, tried to validate. I was like, just get rid of them all. But I didn't, because shame and scarcity was still there. They don't go away. And that meant that I had to find a way. I was invited into that space to find a way, and I chose to find a way that was low stakes, that was vulnerable without being at risk. It meant softness, it meant receiving, it meant self-care and choice. So I chose to go through my books and find one book that the shame and scarcity voices were not as loud. And I found one eventually. I might have forgotten where I got it from. It's maybe a bit battered because it's been in the storage box for so long, or maybe I bought it like that. I don't know. So the emotional and factual attachment to that thing was lessened. And so I went, oh, this one, because the intuitive, so I went, this one. Like, okay, let's just stop there for a second. So I donated this book. I was terrified that the truth was the energy that I had pumped into this book by buying it, keeping it, storing it, moving it, not reading it, but knowing that I have it, was going to be gone. I'd give the book away and all of that energy would go. And I gave it away, and what I noticed was that wasn't true. I retained the energy that I'd given to this book. The book was gone, but my energy stayed. And what happened was that energy then gets redistributed amongst everything else that I own. So the amount of energy that each item gets is minimal, but it's different. It becomes a new book now because there's a different way of seeing it, because there's a different energy to it. So this process was gradual. And as I did that, I got to gather information. Rather than finding answers, I got to gather the information of noticing which books made me feel worst. And which books didn't feel as, existential crisis-y. And so I get to tie the threads together. I get to notice the information and form some little data points and go, okay, this feels true for that, and this feels true for that. And I also realized that by getting rid of everything in one go, I'm going, did it, I'm absolved of all shame. I wouldn't have been able to do that. The experience would have been very different if I just, I'm just going to get rid of everything then. That solves the problem. But by realizing that wouldn't be the case, I had to reframe the way I was approaching this, because in my head, the result was have no books left at the end. Like, what you're doing is a really low stakes way of getting rid of every book you own. And I realized that didn't feel good to me, because there were some books that I really wanted to keep. I knew that deep down. My intuitive self went, this book you keep. You love this book for whatever reason. So I was like, oh, well, if I'm adopting the process of finding the low stakes way of just getting rid of everything, then I'm going to feel shame at the end regardless, because I'll have kept 5 books, because my intuitive self went, yeah, this you're vibing with this book still. This book still feels exciting and great, and you love it, and whatever the reasons. So I'm like, oh, so the destination becomes different. The destination almost vanishes. I was like, well, what's the common denominator then? Like, what's the way in which I adopt this process? It has to be choice. That I choose every item that I keep, and I choose every item I don't keep. That way, I stay in the present, and I'm not affected by the past and future whys. The past why is, well, this is why you got it in the first place, and that's important. And the future why is, this is why you should continue to keep it, because you'll be a bad person if you don't get rid of it. If you do get rid of it, you'll be wasteful, you'll be selfish, you'll be all of these things. But the present why just takes the information that you have in that moment, because there are no answers, and allows you to make a choice based on your needs and your wants. And it's so powerful, because it means that it's not about the keeping or the not keeping. It's about aligning with the story that we had and the story we were trying to provide to others. Because I learned that I could be professional. I can be ready and prepared without the books.
So how did that change your life? Or, you talked a little bit about the story there at the end, but how did that manifest itself in your life, your relationships, the work you were doing, the acting, whatever, impacted that story?
I was able to step into spaces with people, be it in rehearsals or performances or just friendships and family relationships, with more awareness of the way I was showing up. There's something about rehearsals for a show. It's kind of labeled as a safe space that a lot of people have issue with, like inviting people in to see an open rehearsal because it's a vulnerable space. And it's true, there is a vulnerability that happens in a rehearsal room. And I'm sure this happens in, meetings and things before going in to do the big presentation. There is a vulnerability that exists because we have to lay claim to things that we care about and our interpretations of character and scenario and interrelations with human beings as well as the characters they're playing. And there's the part of me that is the professional actor who's come in here and I'm standing in front of a director who can potentially affect my career in front of other actors who I may not resonate with the way they perform. I may not resonate with their character choices. I may not resonate with them as a human being. But there is a pressure that it's all networking. That I have to show up in a space as Paul Sockett, professional actor, and be a good human who's outgoing, who's caring, but also like serious about his acting. Like I have to play all these roles before even trying to play the role that I've been employed to play.
Yeah.
So I'm a million miles away from the present because all the filters I've got in place are weighing on the future. Like, this is why you should be a good actor. This is why you should be a good friend. This is why you should be a good team player. And I'm like, that's exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's terrifying because it means that if I choose to honestly show up in that space as Paul Sockett, human being, Paul Sockett human being, not Paul Sockett professional actor, it means that potentially there is, or should I say, there are going to be more opportunities for me to say difficult words that I might not agree with someone, but I know I've got to tour with this person for 6 months. So I've got the choice of being in a space with that person and saying, hey, I would love a conversation because I don't agree with this, and I'd love to navigate how we interact within this shared space together because that's really important to me. Or I can tolerate that person without saying anything and adopt all forms of behavior, like not being in the same room for too long, not going to the pub if I know they're going, all of these things for 6 months. I protect them. I sacrifice my own human needs because ultimately they are the only things that we can ever sacrifice without the need of anybody else. So I can sacrifice my self and social connection, my sleep, this, productivity, right? We sacrifice sleep, we sacrifice sustenance, food and water, because we work during our lunch break, and shelter. We will not go home, we'll work late because, I could work at home, but it's easier to work at work, even though might mean you go home and you can get a good meal and then you can do some work. And so we just sacrifice. There's the only things we can. So why should I sacrifice all of my human needs for 6 months just to protect somebody else who I don't agree with? I was doing that for years. And I just said, that's exhausting. I'm not able to show up as a human being. And I'm also not able to show up as an actor and a teammate or a boyfriend because I'm too conscious of the WhatsApp group and the turn up at 10 o'clock or turn up a little bit earlier because they arrive a little bit later and I want to get there before that. I'm like, no. So it changed my life in a big way because it meant that I start to see relationships from an in to out perspective rather than an out to in, where I hope that everyone thinks I'm a nice person. Whereas the knowledge is I know I'm a nice person. I know I'm a values-led human being who is able to say difficult words with love and care and grace and patience, and I'm curious and I'm interested. But if I adopt the process of trying to protect that person, I instantly sort of negate all of those qualities.
So it's kind of like, the things that we collect in some ways build our story. And if we're aware of that and we grow our self-awareness, it can have this sort of impact where suddenly we're seeing the world differently. So, we can't impact other people's behavior or values or belief system, but we can impact our responses to it. And as you say, the way we interact with them in terms of whether we tolerate things that we don't agree with or whether we say, hey, let's talk about this because we've got to navigate this together and we can do this in either a way that's painful for both of us or we can do it in a way that, and maybe there's some compromise, but in a way that actually works for both of us.
Yeah, I think, this is the corporate world. This is the political world. This is the social media world where we're told to pick a side. That if they're there and I don't agree, I've got to choose where on that spectrum I am. This is why, especially American politics is confusing to me because you sort of go, there's the left and the right, and then you center left and center right, and there's this navigation of the people at the extremes are the people who choose the definition, because as extreme as they go, everything else has to be proportionate.
Well, that is a really interesting thing, and I'm going to have to be careful not to go down this rabbit hole of politics. But I will say this one thing that, to me, what I don't understand, and it seems to be getting more and more. You talked about this polarization. You've got sort of the extreme right, the extreme left, even less than that, where you've got the moderate right, the moderate left, as they call them. So the thing that really puzzles me is that certainly in the US, definitely in Australia, the politicians, the people in power, seem to have lost the moral compass and the service mentality that, hey, we're public servants. We're here to do our best for the country, for the people in the country. And yes, we might have this philosophy or we might have that philosophy, but they don't kind of start off with what's best in my view, based on my philosophy and values, for the country that I'm running. What they have is, okay, I'm going to take a stand on principle with this thing, and then if I'm on the right, then the left says, oh, I have to oppose that. I oppose that. So they don't question, oh, actually, that might be a good idea. No, sorry, I'm on the other side of politics. I oppose that. And, it doesn't matter which side of politics people are on. There's sort of somebody says something, the other side goes against it. We're seeing this play out in the pandemic beautifully now. One side saying, oh, we've got to get everybody vaccinated. Oh, no, vaccination is bad. We've got to wear masks. Oh, no, masks are bad. So nobody kind of looks at the point, well, let's figure out the best way to go through this situation we're in and how we can keep everybody safe and how we can minimize the negative impact. And
right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very simple way of diverting away from politics, because I agree. And that was merely an example, but it works exactly the same within the corporate world. And within families and within romantic relationships, that societally we are conditioned by gender. I am a white man of privilege. I cannot speak to, and I do not understand a lot of things that go on in the world, but I try my best to be educated about those things.
Yeah.
Which means that I don't know the answers, but I've gathered some information, and it means that I can show up in a space, in a conversation with someone who may identify as queer, who may be of ethnicity that isn't white, and I get to be curious about that rather than go, okay, we veered into politics again. Everything is politics. But right, so let's take a romantic relationship as an example. Okay, I've collected stuff, be it physical stuff, vocabulary stuff, like the words I choose to use, beliefs, that stuff, and I bring that as an individual into a relationship, and so the other person in the relationship has the same. And the Venn diagram is then what we do. We choose to share a space together, be that literally in the relationship, or we choose to move in together and we share a shared physical space. Now, what we've been told to do is that sacrifice is bad. So what we do is we both slot within this smaller circle in the middle of the two bisecting circles. And now it's a bit of a battle and a shifting compromise to go, how do I keep more of my stuff in here than the other person? Because I'm told that sacrifice is bad. I'm told that weakness is giving away things, right? I'm told that negotiation is, that give and take is the paradigm. That if I give you something, you have to take it. And my measurement of what that means, of the weight of that thing, of what you then owe me, is probably different how that person has valued what you've given them and how much they owe you in return. So as that progresses and we're dealing with lots of different things in this shared smaller space, we get further and further away from the fact that the central space is not for two full individuals to exist within. It's for two individuals to create a new shared space. that is not a win or lose, that is not a lose or win, but is a win-win. I might enter that space with a different expectation, like a visual expectation of what I think that looks like, the shared space, and so might the other person. But what there is an opportunity to do is to talk about it and to break it down into the commonalities, because the exact nature of it is actually irrelevant. It's the thing that we tie to that thing of having time together rather than, well, I want to watch a movie together and I want to go out and do something outside together. The actual vision of that is irrelevant. The key point that we can both share is that we want to spend time together at least once a week, whatever.
Yeah, well, one of the things I know, that's kind of fascinating, because I think that can play out in all relationships. I mean, you talk about a romantic relationship, but one of the things I was thinking as you're describing the overlaps and the give and take type attitude or philosophy that we often hear about in these relationships is it's very much, if you're from a marketing point of view, you're talking to an audience that you're presenting something to, then often there's that same dynamic comes into it, doesn't it? Rather than that attitude of let's create this shared space together, something that's a win-win. One of the things you mentioned, and I know you're really strong on this, is that the words we use there, and certainly in relationships, in romantic relationships, I think words can be very hurtful, and we kind of forget that perhaps we can take a step back there and be better, have better choices in the words we use. So talk to us a little bit more about the words we use and the weight they carry, and how you go about kind of helping people to understand that and improve in their communication.
Yeah, words are key, because we used to communicate with paintings and gesture, and then words were developed. Okay, fine. But everyone has a different definition of every word that exists based on their lived experience. Patience is a word, right? And I have a definition of that word, and you have a definition of that word. And say we come into a space where we're having a conversation and you're doing a task, and I want you to do it quicker. My patience is low, right? and you ask me to be patient. Now, we both have patience as our key connector, but my version of patience and your version of patience is different. So I might ask you, and this is something that everyone can try, is to ask the other person how they define or what they mean by that word. Because this is the difference between being past and future or present. Because I might hear a word from you, and if I'm using my past and future of like, well, this is my experience of this word, so this is how I define this word, and the future is what I expect from this conversation, from this interaction. But I'm hearing that word through my own filter of what my definition of that word is. So I start to hear every other word that you're saying in a different way, because the context is through my lens, not yours. So the simplest way that we can practice staying conscious and present in any conversation is to ask that person to define, to share what they mean by that specific word, and say, because I want to hear that word through your lens, not mine. It's so empowering for someone to feel heard and to be honored in that way. Because what it means is, I may have never thought about it. I may have never thought, what is my definition of patience? So I might go, well, I think patience is blah. But then go, actually, I want to change the word, because that's actually, in the context of this conversation, that's not what I mean. So what we do is, we're not telling someone they're wrong, but we're giving someone the opportunity to choose the word they mean. Because commitment and loyalty is branding, right? That's kind of what we're taught.
Yeah.
As a consumer and a customer, we're taught that loyalty is key.
Yeah.
So as soon as we say a word, we've planted our flag and we've gone, this is the word that I'm using.
Well, in some sense, they're kind of labels, aren't they? They're convenient labels for something. And it's kind of like, I don't know, let's say, well, colour is a good one. I've got this document in front of me that came in the mail today, and it's got some orange advertising on it. Now, other person might look at that and say it's red, it's light red. So, that's another label that we give. We say, well, there's a colour. Now, I might be colourblind, somebody else might be colourblind. And so we give it different labels because it's what we see through our lens, like you say. Right. So they're just, in some ways, if we can kind of recognise that they're labels, because I know, and I've been in conversations like this where, it gets a little bit heated and but you said, and,
right.
That's not what I meant.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Evidence. Gather answers, not information. By gathering an answer and evidence, by going, but you said, what we're preventing someone from doing is from making a new choice. Because they may genuinely mean, I didn't mean that. But rom-com films have shaped us to believe that someone saying, I didn't mean that, is either someone trying to get out of something or trying to, at worst, gaslight someone that they are wrong. So we're instantly in the place of right and wrong, and we're at either end and we're trying to defend each side. Whereas there is no such thing as right and wrong. I'm going to put that out there. There's no such thing as right and wrong. Because everyone's valuation system, everyone's way of working that out is different. So it can't exist.
Yeah. And
it's just my interpretation.
We talked about polar opposites before. I mean, there's a continuum of, right and wrong is probably like good and bad. They're words that are pretty meaningless, really. But in terms of, let's say, to take colour again as a metaphor, you can say red and green are completely different colours, but there might be something like a plant might have green leaves, but it's actually somewhere in that continuum between red and green, because there's a mix of different colours there. And in some ways, a lot of these things are not, there's no right and wrong. It's somewhere there's a continuum somewhere.
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable space to allow for new information to change our mind. Because we might have a leaf that is green and red. And if I've chosen that it's more green than red, and you've chosen that it's more red than green, the conversation gets away from what we were actually talking about, which is, what plant is this? Right? So, and then we're taught that concession means that. It means conceding the point. It means you lose.
Yeah.
That winning and losing is a thing. Winning and losing isn't a thing. It's a social structure. So if we can relinquish the need for victory or loss, it means that we have a playing field, that it becomes a game rather than a competition. And we play games for fun. So I can be curious about you, which needs trust. It needs some vulnerable things. We need to together build that trust that I will believe what you say. And that I trust that you will be able to step into that vulnerable space. And so that fluctuates. So we get to choose from relationship to relationship, from interaction to interaction, how much we want to be vulnerable. And that's okay. But if we're consciously trying to avoid being vulnerable at all, that's very different. Because that's not a present choice. That's a past and future way of going. Vulnerability. I learned that vulnerability is bad because it means danger. It means fear. It means punishment. It means all of these things. And the future is like, well, you should never be vulnerable because that way you have more chance of succeeding. You have blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But to step into that space and go, I'm going to practice vulnerability from where my energy sits, from where my emotions sit in this moment, with the person that I'm with, taking factual context into consideration is where engaged, honest conversation happens. And it's a beautiful place to be in. And some people aren't there yet. Some people aren't able to do that. And that's okay. Because if you're listening to this and you go, that's impossible. Like, he's lying. If all of these feelings come up and all of these stories come up, it's okay. Like, you're doing exactly what you've been conditioned to do from day dot. Right? So the revolutionary act is to say, I want to make a choice. It's huge. And it's such a beautiful thing to see people engage with.
And I think there's a shift in mindset that comes with that, isn't there? Because we always have a choice and we always have control over the choice. I have control over the choice I make. I don't have control over what goes on around me. For example, we're just entering another lockdown here, and our holiday for next week has to get cancelled, and this is the second time this same holiday got cancelled through that thing. Now, some people might then say, I mean, I've had a moment of regret today again and thinking, oh, not again. But then, I step out of that and I say, well, there's nothing I can do about that because it's outside of my control. But what I can do is say, okay, my choice, what are my choices now? How can I deal with this? And of course that involves my wife, because it was supposed to be our 40th wedding anniversary. That of course has gone and passed a while ago. So there's two of us involved. So obviously we are having conversations now, but, and whilst we do, slag off on people that we feel are responsible for this, we are also saying, okay, what are our choices now? What do we do?
Yeah.
So, it's kind of empowering when you change your approach to say, well, yes, I'm sad that that's happened, but I can't do anything about that. I can do something about my choice.
Right. That's the only thing you ever have agency over. Regardless of whatever is happening, you only ever have choice. That you never, we can choose to relinquish that. But even in that, a boss might tell us to do something, and rather than have that conversation, we do it. We're still making a choice of how we feel about it.
Yeah.
We're still making a choice of what we say in our heads about that thing. We're still making a choice of who we're going to call after work to rant and rave about it, right? So choice never stops. And as much as that can feel whelmful to people, that constant availability of making choice is actually the most freeing thing that you can have in this life. Because what that means is that the choice you made is not the choice you have to keep making. That the word you said, you get to say, I'm choosing a different word. And even just using that word more, like in that context, I didn't say I'm going to make a new decision.
Yeah.
Because actually I don't use the word decision. I use the word choice. That's another conversation. But, but I'm choosing another word rather than I didn't mean that. Right? It's something we can practice that's really low stakes. It might weird some people out because that's not normally how people will convey that, but that doesn't matter. Because it's all about the internal choice. It's all about the in to out energy rather than the I need to appease or please or support this person.
It does sound a lot different because, if you say to me, well, if I get defensive about something you've said and you then say to me, that's not what I meant, it's almost that feels like you're saying, well, I mean, the next logical comment, and this is what it feels like, is you misunderstood me.
Right.
So put it back on the other person. You didn't understand what I meant. And if you say, oh, okay, let me choose a different way to say that. That feels so much softer, and it's pointing back at you. It's not then pointing at me.
Right. Yeah. Blame. Right. Because it's all about who's at fault, who wins, who loses.
Yeah.
So if we remove that blame, this is why I said it requires trust. Because I can practice. I am not responsible. Here's a key thing that I tend to come back to, which is I'm not responsible for the reactions of others. It's really important to me. That doesn't mean I get to be a sociopath. That doesn't mean I get to be selfish. It doesn't mean I get to do that, be cruel. What it means is that I don't have to take responsibility for how you feel about me being truthful. That's the key point. If I'm sharing my truth, then it's not coming from a place of affectation. It's not coming from a place of manipulation. It's not coming from any of these insidious methods that we can use to affect someone's choice, words, feelings, actions, or any of those things. If it's true to me in this moment, then I am not responsible for your response. Because if it brings up something for you, it's okay. You didn't lose at feelings. This is what I think we feel that we've lost the feelings game because we feel sad and vulnerable and fearful and all of these things. They're not bad feelings. They're really intuitive.
It comes back to that idea of choice, doesn't it? You're not responsible for my choices. But at the same time, I think, one of the things I have adopted over the last 10 or so years is that my communication, the way that's received by another person, is actually my responsibility. Their reaction is not my responsibility, but how they receive it is my responsibility. So if, and I'm doing air quotes here, if they misunderstand me, that's on me.
I think that's where the transition is. I think that's where the line is that can get a bit blurry. Because if we build that trustful relationship, I get to trust that person will acknowledge that they're not too sure about it. We can sense when someone's on the fence of understanding or not understanding. Like we can see it, we can feel it. We're empathetic. We can do that. But we have to trust that person will go, that doesn't feel clear to me. Can you say it another way or can you be clearer? And then we get the choice of either using different words or, shaping that sentence and still in alignment with our feelings, right? Because we're being given an invitation to be honest or we're being given an invitation to tailor our words to help that person get it, to understand it, to come along with us on that. And that's where it gets a bit icky. That's where it gets a bit kind of confusing because we're being generous, we're being kind, and we're saying kind of what we meant. So, that's where it gets a bit blurry.
Yeah, I guess, well, there's some differences there in terms of, it's not that, okay, I want to be kind here, I don't want to hurt your feelings. It's about, here's the message I want to convey. This is how I understand the message. If by your reaction I'm seeing that I don't think I conveyed the message in a way that I mean it, so then I've got to take responsibility for the communication. That doesn't mean to say that I want to be kinder because your response was angry or sad or whatever. That means I want to make the communication such that whatever value I wanted to add to you through that communication, I can actually achieve that. And that may be that I have to tell you, hey, here's something I don't like about you.
Right.
But yeah. I'm doing that from the point of view, and we're talking relationships here, so I'm doing that from the point of view of I want to add value.
Yeah.
To you and to the relationship. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that value is a really key word as well, because I think value societally, again, this is down to definitions and understanding, right, is that value is a very key corporatized word.
Yeah.
Like it's tied to return on investment. It's tied to relationships and networking and all of this thing that leads to like a future result or a validation of doing something or not doing something. So value might work for you as that wording to, it being in an interaction with somebody else. I would use honoring.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I think honoring is probably a better word. And one I use quite often is also serving.
Yeah. Again, that's a really interesting one.
That's a tricky one too. Being of service. Exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than serving. So as opposed to, I'll bring you something to serve you.
Right. So this is where if I'm making assumptions about what that person or that company or that potential customer needs and wants, then I'm not being of service. I'm providing a service. So what I'm doing is I'm shaping the space for something to exist where that might not be what the person needs or wants, but I'm using their cues, I'm using their feedback on surveys, I'm using their facial expressions, I'm using all of these factors, using my filter of what I think those muscle twitches in their face mean as something that I think they need. So there's a difference. So in the coaching world, and I'm relatively new to the coaching world, but my girlfriend is, she's been a coach for a long, long time. And what I've witnessed is that there are people who are coaches, who are people whose desire is to be of service through holding space for people to explore whatever they need to explore. And there are people who call themselves coaches who are people who create products. The 7 steps to success, the get 1,000 people in your networking funnel, in your email list, in your XYZ. When I see those, I don't see someone who's a coach. I see someone who is a salesperson. And there's no right or wrong. There's no good, bad about that. I mean, I have thoughts and opinions, but it's when it's framed within the language of wanting to be of service is where my intuitive self starts to go, I don't feel good. I feel like there is I don't believe that this person who's created this thing has lived this experience, has lived this, like I've created my streamlining system based on a circular economy because those are things I really love and I'm passionate about. And I've experienced this process and found this way of doing it. And there are people creating the 7 steps, the 10 steps, the 16 steps, the, lose 20 pounds in 3 days type thing. I'm like, I don't believe that you have lived that.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between people showing up in the space who are using their lived experience to allow them to be of service. And there are those who are trying to tailor the experience of other people through the thing they've created. So things like, the hierarchical system of a corporate world, there are relationships that you kind of are expected to forge with certain people by saying certain things, by helping in certain ways. That in itself is sales. People come into a middle management position or an entry level position, and there is an element of sales to it, which means that I have to interpret what I think you need or you want in order for me to be of value to you moving forward. That you will have my loyalty, that you can understand my brand. It starts with the individual. Brand starts with the individual, because the words that are used in those huge billion-dollar contexts have filtered down. That's the vocabulary that is used. And there is a societal, cultural understanding of what those words mean, which is what makes interviews weird to me. Because I just imagine someone at the desk with a tick box of going, hardworking, empty box, determined, empty box, team player, empty box. And if they come in, it's like a little bingo thing. It's like, well, why should we give you this job? I'm hardworking, I'm determined, I'm passionate, I'm a team player, bing, 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 bing. We all understand the words. So if we all know what these words mean in the context of this thing, it makes them valueless. Because it's not said with intention. It's not said with, this is who I am.
Yeah.
I can tell the difference between someone who says, I'm passionate about crochet, and someone who goes into an interview space and goes, well, I'm passionate and there's a big difference. I see that person's body embody passion when they say the word crochet. And so there's something with the system that is not leading through values, it's leading through checkboxes. That we have to understand the system in order to win the system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a whole conversation we could go through in terms of hiring, and I certainly have a different way of doing that. But I've just looked at the clock here. I haven't been watching it, and we've been going quite a while, and time flies when you're having fun. But this has been absolutely fascinating conversation, Paul, and I think there's lots of value there and lots of things that we can apply in entrepreneurship and business and in any relationship. And after all, making marketing human is all about relationships. So it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's 5 questions to hopefully give our listeners something to take away and take action on today. So hopefully you'll give us some real snappy answers, and we'll push through it. So what's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Be curious.
Love it.
Yeah. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Be genuinely interested in something. There is something in this world that you are curious about in this moment, and you're allowed to go find it.
Yeah, I love that. And, it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, you don't need the answer right now, but if you've got that curiosity and genuine interest, that's important, I think. So that's certainly, and then connecting the dots from there.
Right.
What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Well, I don't know if you're going to ask me my favorite resource, but it's tied in with my favorite resource.
Yeah, that's the next question. You've been studying the script.
Pad and paper. Getting super basic. Because there's something different about like typing on a device and something about holding a pencil. It's a tiny pencil. I've sharpened it to the end of its life. And piece of paper where nobody's going to see it. Nobody needs to see it. You can rub it out. You can change your mind. It's a really low stakes way of being vulnerable by writing down words that you never thought you'd say or even think, with the opportunity to rub it out, not through shame, but maybe because it brings another thought through and you want space for that. So you get to choose which words you erase, what you write down, whether you turn it over, how you use that space. It really allows for creativity amongst curiosity at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. I'm probably one of the most technical fans of technology, and I love getting everything onto the computer, and because then it doesn't take up physical space. But I do have this is one of my favorite pencils. It's a what is it? A cross pencil, and so I use that. But I've also got these things in my little InnovaBuzz mug. They're a set of Lamy fountain pens, and
I love it.
All different colours. So I like writing in fountain pen on paper with colours, and that is a totally different feeling than, like you say, than typing on paper. And if I'm sitting down thinking or just writing out some content ideas, I often start there.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, you were talking about colours before. We attach feelings to colour. So yeah, I mean, the paper is the core thing, and then just get whatever implements you want to write with. Yeah, multiple colours, pencil crayons, fountain pens. I love a fountain pen. Yeah, I love that idea. And you get to choose. Again, it's about practicing low stakes ways of making conscious choice. And in that moment, if you choose the green pen or the blue pen, doesn't matter, but it does matter because you get to make that choice and feel what that feels like to have agency.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, now the best way to keep a client on track?
Oh, this is a tricky one. Because with this adoption of like no destination, like not having the answers, the track.
It's not.
I think the way I stop people or invite people back from the paved path. So what I do is, rather than keeping them on track, I will actually get them off the track that they know into just choosing the next first step for them.
To help them realize that they've got a choice now. They don't have to. They're not like a train that has to stay on this track.
Yeah, that just because the ground that they don't know doesn't mean there's a big snake there that's going to poison them, right? So they just get to practice that next step by next step. And it might cross over the paved path. It might go over a place that they recognize, and then they're going somewhere else. So, yeah, it's all great.
Yeah. And, the snake will only hurt you if it bites you, so.
Right. Yeah, otherwise it's a beautiful...
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful part of the animal world. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, and the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Stop trying to differentiate yourself. Well, this is really specific, actually, because we were talking about this before. If the energy is trying to find the way that you are different, it's very different from making a conscious choice, feeling what's true for you and saying the words that feel true for you, and knowing that you are different by standard. No one's had your exact lived experience. No one's had all the knowledge that you've got, and blah blah blah. You are different by standard, so don't try to differentiate. Just trust that difference is a constant.
Yeah. So it comes back to me. It comes back a lot to being really self-aware and knowing yourself and being aware that you do have choices in every given instant. Yeah. Somebody said to me,
by not disrupting.
Somebody said to me, we're all born different, so don't die the same, and don't try to be the same.
Right. Yeah, and because everyone else is trying to differentiate themselves, if you aren't trying, you are differentiating yourself by not differentiating yourself. So it'll work.
Love it. Great. All right. Well, thanks, Paul. This has been fabulous. We've gone on for quite some time now. Where can people find out more about your work, what you do, and maybe even reach out and get in touch to say thanks for what you've shared?
My website is paulsockett.com. That's Sockett with 2 T's.com. And I use that space as a bit of a playground for multiple things. There's the coaching and the workshop. There is writing and all of those different things. And you can also find me on Instagram at soulpocket, pocket with 1 T. And it was a bit of a game years ago, and I've just kept it because I like it. And those are the main places you can find me.
Okay, and we'll have those links in the show notes for people to click through on.
Right.
Now, do you have some parting advice for our listener today?
you're enough as you are.
I love it. Yeah.
In this moment, you are everything you need, and you always have a choice.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, finally, who else should I get on this show and why?
I think Jeff mentioned Angie Cole. She's a powerful coach and sage, and a coach, and she's got content around money, value, and worth, which is really powerful. Who else? I mean, the thing is, Jeff Harry kind of mentions all the names. He's just master connected. I'm like, and there's Lauren. Oh, yeah, no, he's mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, I have had a conversation with Lauren Yee, so we're going to bring her on the show soon. I'm not sure that we've already contacted Angie, but we certainly will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My mind's gone blank. I'm now... That was the one question I didn't prepare for. And I can always reach out and let you know later.
Sure, yeah. Well, happy to take on further suggestions later anyway.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights so generously with us today, Paul. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think we've sort of gone off on different tangents, but there's been lots there that I think, if you look beyond the politics, beyond the romantic relationship stuff, it's all about, human relationships and interacting with one another in a way that's respectful and a way that we don't have this win-lose, black-white, red-green, up-down, left-right, whatever it is, dichotomy. That's actually, everything is actually a continuum, and that we're all connected in some way, so that we should aim for win-win.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for that, and all the best for the future. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, Jürgen. Thanks for the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and really delightful conversation with Paul and took something away from his episode. I think the core of all the messages in this episode was be human, be yourself, be curious and genuinely interested in other people and what's going on around us. I'd love to know what you took away from Paul's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Paul Sockett. That is PaulSockett. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Paul Sockett. You'll also find contact information there for getting in touch with Paul, as well as links to his website, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in our conversation today. If you liked this episode, then please share it with a couple of other people that it might help. Tag me in on that share and I'll reach out to you with a special thank you gift for sharing this and helping other people. Paul suggested that we have a conversation with business coach Angie Cole of Untaming the Wild on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Angie, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast courtesy of Paul Sockett. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including Jerome Courtauld from Sales Flair and Trey Taylor, author of A CEO Does Only 3 Things. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.